Popular media features two types of heroes, the unrelatable hero and the relatable hero. Heroes are the characters we want to win, to reach their goals, to save the blacksmith's daughter, to slay the troll and beat the bad guys. The unrelatable hero can sometimes be aspirational. We might want to be like the hero, or we might want someone like the hero in our lives. These unrelatable heroes are not always consistent across time. Often, the unrelatable hero is simply a reflection of what we don't have, what we aren't used to. It is enjoyable because it's unfamiliar, and it wouldn't be aspirational if we already had it. A friend pointed out that Shakespeare did not depict the adventuring type in his plays, implying that being an adventurer was not aspirational in Shakespeare's time and place. Adventurers were not unfamiliar, and possibly not unrelatable characters. I can imagine that there were many in Shakespeare's time, and I'm sure they existed prominently in the mind's eye of English society. It was, after all, the time of piracy, of settling new colonies, of exploring. So, that type wasn't manifest in their depictions of heroes. I like using popular theatre as a medium of understanding what society was like for most people. In our globalized Anglo-American context, popular theatre is wrestling. If you don't know, pro wrestling is staged bouts of wrestling matches featuring genuine athletic prowess and framed by ongoing storylines. They have writers, coaches, music, entrances, costume design, feuds, drama, and resolution. It is popular theatre, in front of a live audience, televised and streamed. And I have found it a telling source of signals for the times over the past few decades and even today. Let me walk you through some examples. In the 1980s, wrestling featured characters like Hulk Hogan, the Macho Man, Randy Savage, and the Ultimate Warrior. These were larger-than-life personalities, superheroes really, that fought each other in storylines that were heavily driven by personal conflict. He stole my girl, by patriotism, at the time the United States versus Iraq, and battles between good and evil. This is the time of Rambo, of Schwarzenegger's Conan the Barbarian, and of the comic book revivals of Batman and Superman. Wrestling marketed itself as family-friendly. Say your prayers, take your vitamins, and upholding good guy morals. This image hit a darker reality: cocaine, steroids, worker mistreatment, and sexual misconduct. You can think of American sitcoms in the 80s and how their depictions were of happy, coherent, nuclear families in a time when their society was often unhappy, doubtful, divided. And how the behind the scenes of shows like The Cosby Show were a lot more horrific than the image they presented. So, the unrelatable heroes of the 80s were unfamiliar because, well, people like the characters did not exist for most people. There were no responsible figures. So these types of unrelatable heroes emerged in popular media. The 1980s also had their misfit characters, your Goonies or Ghostbusters, Marty McFly, X-Men, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Relatable heroes, the I'm literally him characters of their time. People wanting them to win, but they reflected people's fears and desires in a way that was closer to home. Less larger than life, more found family, finding my place, and putting aside our differences for the greater good. In the 1990s, when counterculture emerged, the unrelatable hero in wrestling emerged as Stone Cold Steve Austin, a no-nonsense, badass Texan who beats up his boss and everyone who gets in his way, while the relatable hero emerged as Mick Foley, an unexceptional everyman, constantly down on his luck, who was beat down by the corporate system when he tried to aspire for greatness. The 90s was punk and grunge, anti-music, and The Simpsons, the anti-sitcom. Being beat down by corporate America was relatable. and wanting to beat back was aspirational, unfamiliar. It didn't happen. The early 2000s for the Anglo-American world were an uncertain time, a time where leadership was felt to be lacking, but also where the everyman had the impression that they could press on and do well for themselves, by themselves. Wrestling saw the muscle man John Cena go from the loud-mouthed doctor of thugonomics to the saluting hustle, loyalty, respect Superman, both aspirational, both a return to simplicity. Wrestling in the 2000s seemed to lack relatable characters. At most, getting the talk truth to power, voice of the voiceless CM Punk, who, while voicing relatable fan opinions, never became a relatable everyman character. In the Lord of the Rings movies, Aragorn was, and is, an unrelatable hero. He is that time's aspirations of masculinity and leadership. In the same movies, you have the Hobbit characters serve as variations of relatable heroes. Frodo with his grief and sadness, Sam with his loyalty and hope, Pippin with his hand-in-heart innocence, and Merry with his hidden strength. In other movies, Harry Potter and his friends were relatable, and they win through the love of their friends and being true to themselves. They rarely deal with threats directly. They don't really change. They are themselves, and the plot appears to disappear their problems, to adapt, to move them out of the way. In the 2000s, people related to John Mayer singing about knowing that the fight wasn't fair and how they were waiting on the world to change. The great protest song was not wanting to be an American idiot. It was wanting bad things to stop while you kept on chugging. Appropriate heroes for a society that still thought it was living under pre-2008 rules, who still thought you could become wealthy by working hard and staying in your lane. Today's unrelatable heroes include John Wick, a man who is terribly capable, but alone, and wages war, successfully, against entire systems. Dalinar, of the Stormlight Archive books, who learns to carry the weight of his past and begrudgingly takes on the mantle of king to save the world. And Maverick, in the Top Gun sequel, a returning hero to teach the younger generation and win the day against starkly superior enemies. In wrestling, the unrelatable hero for the past few years has been Cody Rhodes, a sort of returning prince of wrestling, a true king, come back to defeat the tyrant Roman Reigns and his oppressive bloodline faction. It has been astoundingly successful as a storyline. The shows also include similarly unrelatable but very popular figures, like an egotistical showman with a Joker-like personality and a badass, takes what he wants when he wants, beast. And while relatable everyman characters do feature in wrestling, they have been sidelined to a wholly more dramatic return of the king-like narrative in a court of larger-than-life personalities. In other media, today's relatable heroes and our relatable experiences are Ryan Gosling's characters and their repressed pain, Mr. White's bitterness and failed potential, Elliot Anderson's mental illness in Mr. Robot, and Kaladin, again of the Stormlight Archive books, a weary, traumatized, heart of stone man who can't stop losing his friends. We even project our mood onto silent characters of the past, turning Half-Life's Gordon Freeman into an exhausted, despairing fighter at the end of the world. A broad brush picture of what life for many of us 20-somethings is like today would include terms like alienated, wandering, purposeless, repressed, bitter, jaded. Our relatable heroes reflect as much, and our aspirational characters point to fantasies of escape from this life experience. The lone wolf and the good king. The lone wolf strategy being a cabin in the woods strategy, living on an isolated homestead with a gun and some dogs. It's the John Wick fantasy. The soaring popularity of survival, homesteading, and off-grid content on TikTok and YouTube showcases to me how many people entertain in themselves this escapism. And it's clear that some are doing it for notional practical utility. Some, including the content creators, have evidently enacted that escapism or want to. The other aspirational fantasy is the good king fantasy. We hope for the coming of a wise ruler who will kill the beast that feeds on us and accrues wealth at our expense. We feel deeply the rightness of such an arrival. It's prophetic, and I mean literally the stuff of prophecies. King Arthur, Gilgamesh, Judaism, Christianity. But we are post-individualist people. And we're not in an age of mass man either. We are not Homo Britannicus or Homo Sovieticus. Learning about the people of the past, you begin to get a sense that whatever they were, and they were complicated, we are not them. I hold that we still contain them in a Jungian we are of an immense age sense, but we clearly aren't them. We cannot escape this crisis as individuals. We aren't as smart, as competent, as confident, as driven, as trained as the individuals of those civilizations that built themselves on and off exceptional people. We cannot escape this as a mob either. The populists will, or already have, hit a hard wall. Pornography, consumption culture, and the attention void of the internet act as a hard limit on how much people will do. I saw a video thumbnail the other day that stated, "We are amusing ourselves to death." I didn't watch the video, so maybe there's context that I'm missing, but that statement clicked as a perfect description of our current social apocalypse. People are amusing themselves to death, and yet prove that they won't change their lifestyle away from unhealthy habits. Further, people will actively choose to continue those habits when they are threatened. Remember how people immediately found another TikTok when they thought it was going to be banned in the US? Or how people just made other Twitters when X stopped being amusing. So, people fantasize about escaping the noise and returning to monkey. But they do so from a self-replicating cage. A cage that they actively choose to stay in. And they fantasize about the coming of a king. Sometimes the mythical return of one who will force them to change. An era of personal fatherlessness has lined up with an age of cultural forefatherlessness. There feels like there is nothing worth inheriting. Is it so strange so much of our art fantasizes about killing the past? There is bitterness and anger at the lot we've been left in, so we have no respect for it. Look at the way we talk politically. We chop up the past and piece it into narratives that fit our aims. I mean, who's actually going to care if I make the past my puppet? Well, who's going to stop me seems a rather desperate plea when you think about it. We really hope someone will. Thanks for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts or have a chat about this topic. You can comment below, or you can direct message me on Teller. It's a messaging service that lets you tip me when you message me. I'll respond, and maybe it'll spur another video. I might even post my favorite exchanges. Thank you. Talk soon.